"This is your last warning, ma'am." Helena Vane stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to feel like a threat, and keeping it just loud enough so the guests in the sun-bathed lobby of the Grand Halcyon could still hear every syllable. Her orange cream blazer perfectly pressed, every strand of blonde hair in place. The composed performance of a woman used to getting what she wanted inside these walls. "Remove the animal from this property, or I call the police and you forfeit your $600 deposit." Arabella Sutton looked at her, really looked at her, the way you look at a situation you've already calculated from 3 angles. 2 tours, a field promotion, a service dog named Atlas who had pulled her back from the edge of something dark on 4 separate nights in the last year alone. She hadn't come to a 5-star hotel to fight. She'd come because her therapist said she'd earned rest. She didn't speak. She pulled out her phone, opened an app, and pressed record. Because one thing 312 days of active combat had permanently installed in Arabella Sutton was the discipline to document before she reacted, and what the camera caught in the next 4 seconds, as Helena Vane reached down and grabbed Atlas's service vest and pulled, would be seen by 1 million people before midnight, starting with the state attorney general standing 6 feet behind them, luggage at her feet, already reaching into her jacket. Welcome to Frost Folk Tales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. The Grand Halcyon was the kind of place that understood light as a form of power. The atrium ceiling stretched 4 stories above the lobby floor, its glass panels admitting full mid-morning sunlight in broad, clean columns that fell across Italian marble and fresh-cut arrangements of white flowers. Overhead, recessed fluorescent panels reinforced the daylight at every angle, eliminating shadow, making the whole space feel observed, curated, deliberately seen. There was nowhere to hide in the Grand Halcyon lobby, which was precisely the point. It was a stage built for beautiful arrivals. Arabella Sutton's arrival had not been beautiful by the hotel's standards, apparently, though by any reasonable measure, she had walked through those revolving glass doors, looking exactly like what she was, a decorated veteran with a certified service animal, a reservation confirmation on her phone, and nothing to apologize for. She wore an olive green top tucked into dark navy slacks, simple and clean. A purple heart pin sat on her collar, catching the light with each small movement. Atlas walked at her left heel the way he always did, deliberate, unhurried, his Belgian Malinois frame compact and alert beneath his official service vest, the laminated certification card visible in its clear plastic window on the vest's left panel. He did not drift. He did not pull. He moved exactly as he was trained to move, which was the way Arabella Sutton had always moved, with discipline, with purpose, without asking for permission to exist in a space. She had checked in at the front desk with a young clerk named Tobias Reyes, who had been warm and professional and had begun the process of confirming her reservation without incident. That was when Helena Vane had appeared. Arabella Sutton had noticed her before Helena Vane noticed her. Old habit, situational awareness baked into muscle memory. A woman in her mid-40s crossing the lobby with the brisk, proprietary stride of someone who considered this floor her personal jurisdiction. Orange cream blazer, navy pencil skirt, blonde hair swept back with the kind of precision that communicated she had been managing impressions since before most of her staff had graduated high school. General manager, Arabella Sutton had clocked immediately. The kind of general manager who considered her own presence in the lobby a quality control exercise. Helena Vane's eyes had landed on Atlas and stayed there, and whatever calculation moved behind them had reached its conclusion before she'd covered half the distance to the desk. The first exchange had been surface-level professional. Helena Vane had addressed Arabella Sutton directly, bypassing Tobias Reyes entirely, and had asked to see documentation for the service animal. Arabella Sutton had been through this before. She'd produced the documentation, the vest, the certification card, the handler identification letter from her VA provider, items she carried in the front pocket of her bag, specifically because this was not the first lobby and Helena Vane was not the first manager. Federal law did not require documentation. She had it anyway. She'd handed it over anyway, because Arabella Sutton understood the arithmetic of being a black woman asking for accommodation in a 5-star hotel. You came prepared to do 10 times the work required, and you did it without showing the fatigue that work cost you. She had spent years becoming fluent in that particular math. Tobias Reyes had looked at the documents and looked at his screen and confirmed the reservation with a small, apologetic steadiness in his expression that Arabella Sutton recognized as the face of someone caught between what they knew was right and who signed their paycheck. Helena Vane had not been satisfied. She'd cited guest comfort. She'd cited an internal verification standard. She'd spoken about the hotel's responsibility to its clientele, with the smooth conviction of a woman reciting policy she'd personally shaped. And with each exchange, her voice had risen precisely one calibrated degree, not shouting, never shouting, but expanding outward through the lobby the way sound expands in a tiled space, touching the couple at the concierge desk, touching the businessman by the elevators with his rolling suitcase stalled at his feet, touching the woman near the entrance who had her phone casually angled in a way that might have been habitual and might have been intentional and was, as it turned out, live streaming to 800,000 subscribers. None of that was visible to Arabella Sutton yet. What was visible was the lobby's light, the marble, the white flowers, the faces of strangers turning by degrees in her direction, and Helena Vane's immaculate performance of a woman who believed she was entirely in the right. 312 days of active combat had given Arabella Sutton a very specific education in the difference between situations that required her to act and situations that required her to wait. She had learned to hold the space between impulse and response like a breath held underwater. Not suppression, not weakness, but the precise and practiced stillness of someone who understood that timing was not tactical in combat only. It was tactical everywhere. Dr. Serafina Ito had called it regulation. Her unit had called it discipline. Arabella Sutton, sitting in therapy sessions over the last 2 years working through what 312 days had left inside her, had come to call it the one thing that had kept her and the people around her alive in conditions where the margin between a decision and its consequence was measured in fractions of a second. She had not come to the Grand Halcyon to deploy that skill in a hotel lobby. She had come because Dr. Serafina Ito had looked at her across the therapy office 4 weeks ago and said, with the particular quiet authority of someone who did not offer prescriptions lightly, "You have earned rest, Arabella. 4 days, somewhere that doesn't ask anything of you. Atlas stays with you." That's not a request. So when Helena Vane delivered her last warning, voice controlled, smile glacial, the word animal landing with an emphasis that was not accidental, Arabella Sutton made a decision. Not the decision Helena Vane was demanding, the decision that 312 days had trained her to make. Document the situation before you respond to it. She reached into her pocket, opened her phone, and pressed record. Her hand was steady, her face was still. Atlas sat at her left heel and looked at nothing in particular, with the focused, unbothered calm of a dog who had seen his handler in worse situations than this and trusted her completely. Helena Vane registered the phone. Her expression shifted by a fraction. Not fear, not yet, but the micro-recalibration of someone who had expected capitulation and received something else. She stepped closer. She spoke again. Arabella Sutton did not lower the phone. And then Helena Vane did the thing that changed the geometry of everything that came next. She reached down. Her hand closed around the handle loop on the top of Atlas's service vest. The bright red handle that existed for emergencies, for medical assistance, for the moments when Arabella Sutton's body couldn't manage its own balance or terror without something solid to hold on to. And she pulled, not violently, with the brisk, dismissive certainty of a woman removing an obstacle. as though Atlas were a piece of misplaced luggage, as though his vest were hotel property, as though the loop she had grabbed was not the same loop that Arabella Sutton's hand found in the dark of 3 a.m. when her nervous system couldn't find the floor. The lobby went absolutely still. The sound of the moment was a single sharp intake of breath from somewhere to Arabella Sutton's right. A guest, a stranger, someone who understood before they could articulate it that something had just been violated. Atlas did not react. He was trained not to react. He planted his feet and held his position with a steadiness that made Arabella Sutton's chest ache with something she didn't have words for yet. Her camera was still recording. The 4 seconds of footage captured Helena Vane's hand on the vest, the slight displacement of Atlas's stance, and Arabella Sutton's face. Not collapsed, not breaking, not giving Helena Vane the satisfaction of a reaction she could dismiss as emotional. Present, still, watching. The camera also captured, in the upper left corner of the frame, the edge of a figure standing 6 feet behind them. Arabella Sutton didn't look. She didn't know yet. She didn't know that the figure had set down her luggage with the unhurried precision of someone who had already made a decision. She didn't know that the figure's hand had moved inside a structured blue jacket and closed around something cold and official and exact. She didn't know that the woman now standing 6 feet behind Helena Vane had heard every word from the moment she walked through the glass doors, and that she had recognized the olive green top and the purple heart pin and the set of Arabella Sutton's shoulders before she'd recognized her face, and that something in her chest had gone very cold and very focused and very certain of exactly what it was going to do next. Arabella Sutton was still looking at Helena Vane. She was still recording. She was still standing. What she didn't know yet was that salvation had just walked through the front door, and it already had its badge out. Celestine Adeyemi had walked into courtrooms where the air itself seemed to resist her. She had stood before appellate judges who looked at her the way some people look at weather, something to be endured and waited out. She had delivered closing arguments in cases where the evidence was bulletproof and the jury was not. And she had learned over 10 years of doing this work that the most dangerous thing she possessed was not her law degree or her title or the weight of the state behind her name. It was her stillness, the particular cultivated stillness of a woman who has trained herself to become very quiet precisely when every nerve in her body is screaming. She was standing 6 feet behind Helena Vane when she set her luggage down. She had been mid-step, rolling a slate-gray carry-on across the sunlit marble, when the voice reached her. Helena Vane's voice, pitched just loud enough to perform for an audience, that particular register of public contempt that Celestine had learned to identify, the way a physician identifies a specific fracture in an X-ray. She had slowed. She had stopped. She had watched a woman in an orange cream blazer and a navy pencil skirt close the distance on another woman standing alone in the center of a lobby full of people who were carefully not interfering. And then she had recognized the other woman's shoulders, not her face. Her shoulders, the exact angle of them, squared and still. That particular posture Celestine had watched Arabella Sutton hold in every difficult moment she had ever witnessed her move through. The posture of someone who has decided that the only thing she can control right now is the geometry of her own spine. Celestine had seen those shoulders in a library at 2 in the morning during finals week, bent over a constitutional law textbook, refusing to break. She had seen them in an airport, the last time Arabella deployed, when they embraced, and Arabella had said, "Don't make a face at me, Cece." And Celestine had made a face at her anyway because it was the only thing she could think of to do that wouldn't involve crying. She had seen those shoulders 6 months after Arabella came home, when they were different. Still squared, still held, but carrying something invisible and enormous, something that had no name in any law book Celestine had ever studied. She watched Helena Vane reach down and grabbed the handle of Atlas's service vest. Something in Celestine Adeyemi's chest went very cold and very focused. She set her luggage down precisely, without drama, the way she set a legal brief on a table before she began reading it aloud. She straightened the lapel of her blue jacket over her deep green blouse. She reached into the interior pocket and closed her hand around what was there. Then she covered the 6 feet between them in measured, deliberate strides because she was not hurrying. Hurry implied panic, and Celestine Adeyemi was not panicking. She was arriving. "Excuse me." Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. There is a particular quality to a voice that has spent a decade commanding courtroom silence, a density, a weight, a certainty that the words are going to land regardless of the ambient noise, and Celestine's voice had that quality completely. Helena Vane turned, still holding Atlas's vest, and Celestine watched the woman's expression perform its first recalibration. A new guest had approached, a tall black woman in a blue jacket, probably here to complain about being kept from the desk. Celestine opened the badge holder and held it level, the state seal catching the overhead light. "Celestine Adeyemi, State Attorney General. I'd like you to release that animal's vest." The lobby did something interesting then. It had already been quiet, in the way of a crowd choosing silence over intervention. Now it went quiet in a different way. The way a room goes quiet when something everyone was pretending not to watch suddenly becomes something they are watching openly and without apology. Celestine registered it peripherally. She did not look away from Helena Vane. Helena Vane released the vest. She did it in 2 distinct motions. The first a reflexive drop. The second, a deliberate smoothing of her own blazer, a physical attempt to rewrite the gesture, as if it had been a choice rather than a flinch. Celestine noted both motions, with the same detached precision she used when opposing counsel objected in court. Noted, continued. "I have been present in this lobby for approximately 4 minutes, Celestine said, and her voice carried the even cadence of a woman reading aloud from a statutory citation. "In that time I witnessed you approach this guest, raise your voice at her in a public setting, physically contact a certified service animal's identification vest, and threaten law enforcement intervention without legal basis. I want to be very clear about what I observed, so there is no ambiguity later." Helena Vane's performance was collapsing in stages, the way a building doesn't fall all at once. First the authority, that crisp managerial certainty had already gone. Now the composure was going. The practiced smile flattening into something uncertain and exposed. She was recalibrating still, searching for the register that fit this new situation, and Celestine could see her trying on responses, the way someone tries on clothes in a bad light, the apology, the clarification, the professional pivot. "I was simply enforcing our hotels." "What you were doing," Celestine said, without heat, without raising her voice by a single degree, "may constitute a violation of Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits places of public accommodation from denying service on the basis of disability or refusing admission to a certified service animal. It may also constitute a civil rights matter under applicable state statutes, and the physical contact with the animal's vest, made without the handler's consent and in a manner clearly intended to intimidate, may additionally constitute criminal menacing under state law. I am not making a final determination. I am telling you what I observed and what the relevant legal framework is, so that you have that information." She paused, not for effect, because she was finished with that portion of what she needed to say, and she intended to let it settle before she continued. 10 years of prosecutorial timing did not go away. "Is this guest's reservation in order?" Celestine said. Arabella had not moved. Celestine had not looked at her directly yet, because she understood something critical about this moment, that Arabella Sutton did not need to be looked at with concern right now, did not need Celestine's expression to confirm that she had been wronged, did not need anything that resembled pity. She needed the problem solved. She would need her friend in about 45 minutes when the adrenaline had done its work and they were somewhere private. Right now she needed an attorney general. At the front desk, Celestine clocked the young clerk, Tobias Reyes. His name tag said, a young man with dark hair and the carefully managed expression of someone who has been watching something wrong happen and could not figure out what he was permitted to do about it. She caught his eye. He straightened. The reservation, Celestine said again, addressing both of them. For this guest. Yes, Tobias Reyes said, and his voice came out more certain than his expression suggested he'd expected. It's yes, the reservation is confirmed. I can complete the check-in right now. The live stream camera, which Celestine had registered in her peripheral awareness the moment she cleared the distance. A young woman near the check-in desk in a bright orange top, holding a phone at a very precise angle that had nothing to do with casual filming, had not moved. It was pointed directly at her badge. Celestine was aware of the phone. She did not look at it, because looking at it would shift the weight of this moment in a direction that served no one. She had not come over here to perform. She had come over here because the law she had spent her entire professional life enforcing had just been violated in front of her, and behind it was a woman she loved, in the old, unspoken way of people who survived difficult years together. Helena Vane was not speaking anymore. She was standing in the overhead fluorescent and natural skylight of the Grand Halcyon lobby, in her orange cream blazer, with her immaculate hair and her operational smile entirely offline. And she looked, for the first time since Celestine had laid eyes on her, like a person who had just grasped the specific shape of the situation she was in. It was not a dramatic unraveling. It was quieter than that. A controlled surface beginning to show the physics of pressure underneath it. You'll want to note, Celestine said, and she finally turned, slightly, partially, so that she was addressing both Helena Vane and the general space of the lobby, that any documentation of this incident that exists, recorded, photographed, or otherwise captured, will be relevant to any subsequent proceeding. I'd encourage everyone in this lobby to retain what they have. She turned then to Arabella fully, and their eyes met, and Celestine let her expression do the one thing she had been holding back. Something small and certain, not a smile, not yet, just the look that said, I'm here, I heard everything. You don't have to hold it alone anymore. Arabella held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at the front desk. I'd like to check in, she said. Her voice was steady and even and absolute. Tobias Reyes began typing across the lobby. Helena Vane reached into the pocket of her orange cream blazer and produced her phone. Her hands moved to the screen. Celestine watched without appearing to watch. A prosecutor's peripheral field of vision, wide and precise, and saw that the hands pulling up the corporate number were not entirely steady. A faint tremor, the kind that adrenaline produces in people who have just understood that the next several hours are going to require more than they budgeted for. The phone near the check-in desk caught it. The live stream viewer count, which had been climbing since Celestine produced her badge, climbed further. Helena Vane raised the phone to her ear, and somewhere outside the Grand Halcyon, in the brilliant late morning light flooding through the glass atrium ceiling and spilling down onto the marble floor of the lobby, something had already changed, irrevocably, documentably, in the presence of 800,000 witnesses who did not yet know their number would triple by nightfall. Celestine Adeyemi picked up her carry-on and walked calmly to the desk. Rosamund Fairbanks's hands were still trembling when she stopped the stream. She stood near the check-in desk, her phone lowered, and for a moment she simply breathed. 40 minutes. She had been filming for 40 minutes. She had started the stream as she always did. Cheerful intro, soft travel music cued in the background, a slow pan across the Grand Halcyon's soaring glass atrium ceiling, the kind of overhead natural skylight that made a luxury hotel feel like it existed inside a dream. She had been narrating the check-in experience for her followers, describing the warm marble, the overhead fluorescent lighting that blended seamlessly with the afternoon sky pouring through the glass, the towering floral arrangements that smelled faintly of white orchid. She had not planned to document a civil rights incident. And yet, she uploaded the full 40-minute recording at 3:47 in the afternoon. The title she chose was simple, because she could not think of anything else. What just happened at the Grand Halcyon? Then she clipped 12 minutes of the most critical footage. Helena Vane's voice carrying across the marble floor, the moment her hand closed around Atlas's vest, the lobby going completely silent, and then Celestine Adiemi's measured, devastatingly calm voice filling the room like a verdict, and uploaded that separately. She added no commentary. She did not need to. By 4:15, the 12-minute clip had 60,000 views. By 5:30, it had 300,000. By the time Arabella Sutton sat on the edge of the hotel bed in room 412, the window throwing a wide rectangle of late afternoon light across the floor, it had cleared 800,000 and was still climbing. She did not know this yet. Her phone was face down on the nightstand, buzzing steadily, the way a trapped insect buzzes against glass. She had not looked at it since Celestine had walked her to the elevator, one hand briefly on her shoulder, and said, "I am not leaving this building until they hand you a key card. Go rest. I mean that." And Celestine Adiemi had always meant what she said. That had been true since their sophomore year of college, and nothing about 2 decades or a state attorney general's badge had changed it. Arabella Sutton was not resting. She sat on the edge of the bed in her olive green top and dark navy slacks, her purple heart pin still on her collar because she had not had the energy to remove it. And she looked at Atlas. He was at the foot of the bed, curled with his nose tucked toward his tail, his service vest unclipped and folded beside him because she always removed it when they were off duty. He was breathing slow and even. He was, in the precise and ordinary way of dogs, completely unbothered. She had trained herself, in the years since she came home, to use Atlas as a calibration point when everything inside her was noise and static, and the hypervigilance that never fully went away, the way her eyes always tracked exits, the way a sudden sound made her spine go rigid before her mind had caught up. She looked at Atlas. If Atlas was calm, she was permitted to consider that the room might be safe. She had learned this not from instinct but from repetition, the slow reconditioning that Dr. Serafina Ito had guided her through across 2.5 years of Thursday appointments. Atlas was calm. Arabella Sutton pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. She had not wanted any of this. That was the thing she kept returning to, the fact that sat in her chest like a stone. She had not come here to be a symbol. She had not come here to document anything, or prove anything, or demonstrate anything about dignity to anyone who was watching. She had come because Dr. Ito had sat across from her in that small office with the skylight above the desk and said, in the direct and unornamented way that made her an excellent therapist, "You have not slept more than 4 consecutive hours in 6 weeks. You have earned rest. You are going to go get it." She had written the name of the hotel on a notepad and slid it across the desk like a prescription. 4 days. That was all she had wanted. 4 days in which no one needed anything from her, and nothing was required of her, and she could exist in the ordinary world without her hands clenched or her jaw locked. She had packed 3 books she had been meaning to read for a year. She had told herself she might swim. She had imagined, in small and specific detail, what it might feel like to sit in a garden with Atlas across her feet and simply read. Instead, she was sitting on the edge of a bed in a room she had almost not been given, her phone buzzing without stopping. And somewhere outside this door, the world was building something out of 40 minutes of footage she had no control over. 4 specific nights. That was what she was thinking about. Not the lobby, Not Helena Vane's voice, or her hand on Atlas's vest, or the cold clarity of Celestine producing her badge. She was thinking about 4 specific nights in the past year when she had come back to consciousness from sleep paralysis. That particular horror of a mind awake inside a body that will not move, every circuit firing distress with no exit. And Atlas had been there, his weight pressed against her chest, his steady breath. The first night it happened, she had not understood what he was doing. By the 4th night, she understood that his body against hers was a signal her nervous system trusted when it trusted nothing else. That his breathing was a rhythm she could borrow when her own became unreachable. That he had stayed all 4 times without being asked, without training that could fully explain it, the way some things cannot be fully explained. She had not told this to anyone, except Dr. Ito. She reached down and put her hand on Atlas's side. He exhaled and did not move. She left her hand there. In a back office on the hotel's administrative level, the overhead fluorescent lighting was very bright and very unforgiving, and Helena Vane was sitting with her phone pressed hard against her ear. She had not moved from this chair in 45 minutes. Her navy pencil skirt was still immaculate. Her orange cream blazer was buttoned. She had the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that composure was armor, and she was wearing it now the way a person wears armor when they are not sure it will hold. Clifton Marsh's voice on the phone was the voice of a man who was selecting every word with the care of someone navigating something that could explode. He was the hotel chain's regional vice president. He had been in situations before. This was not like those situations, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so directly. "Say nothing publicly," he told her. "Nothing. Not a statement, not a comment, not a word to any staff member that could be repeated. Legal is being mobilized as of an hour ago. I will be there tomorrow morning. You do not speak to the woman. You do not speak to anyone identifying themselves as from her party, and you do not speak to press. Do you understand me, Helena?" She understood him. She said so. What she did not say, and what she had not said to anyone, was that she had watched the video. Someone on staff had sent her the link at 4:30. A brief message attached. "You should see this." She had watched herself on the small rectangle of her phone screen, her own voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby, her own hand moving toward Atlas's vest. She had watched herself from the outside, the way you watch a stranger, and she had observed something she did not have a word for yet. She had believed, in the moment, that she was doing her job. She had been absolutely certain of it. The certainty had felt like ground under her feet. The video made the ground feel like something else entirely. She sat in the bright office and listened to Clifton Marsh's voice and said very little. And the notification count on the screen she was trying not to look at kept climbing in a way that had stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like something else. Pressure. The specific pressure of a thing that cannot be contained after a certain point, and that point had passed at some hour she could not now identify. At 7:22 in the evening, Dominique Alcott went live. She was at the news desk in a structured charcoal blazer, her voice carrying the precise register of a journalist who has confirmed everything she is about to say and is prepared to say all of it. Behind her, on the large screen that framed the studio set, the 12-minute clip began to play. The lobby's glass atrium, the overhead light, Arabella Sutton, composed and still in her olive green top and dark navy slacks, the purple heart pin at her collar, Atlas in his official service vest at her left heel, Helena Vane's voice. The moment, the chyron at the bottom of the screen read, in white text on a red bar, "Army Veteran Service Dog, grabbed in hotel lobby, State Ag witnesses incident." Dominique Alcott said, "The woman seen in this footage is Arabella Sutton, a decorated Army veteran and Purple Heart recipient. The dog at her side is Atlas, her certified psychiatric service dog. The incident took place this afternoon at the Grand Halcyon Hotel. The woman who intervened has been identified as State Attorney General Celestine Adeyemi, who was present in the lobby as a guest and witnessed the confrontation firsthand. The hotel chain has not yet issued a public statement. Ms. Sutton has not yet spoken publicly. As of this broadcast, the full video has been viewed more than 1 million times. In room 412, Arabella Sutton finally picked up her phone. She looked at the screen for a long moment. The notifications were beyond counting. She set the phone back down, face down, on the nightstand. At the foot of the bed, Atlas lifted his head, looked at her once with his calm and absolute attention, and then lowered it again. She reached over and turned off the bedside lamp. The room held the last of the evening light from the window, going soft and gold, and the phone continued its quiet buzzing, and Atlas breathed, and Arabella Sutton lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. Outside, the world was very loud. In here, for now, there was only the sound of her dog breathing, steady as a tide, steady as anything she had ever been asked to trust. She let herself trust it. The folder slid under Arabella Sutton's door. At 6 in the morning, she was already awake. Had been since a little after 4, which wasn't unusual anymore. Atlas was awake too, pressed warm against her left side on the hotel bed, amber eyes tracking the ceiling fan. He'd figured out a long time ago what his job was on nights like this, mostly just to weigh more than the dark did. The TV stayed off, her phone stayed face down. She'd switched the overhead light on around 4:20 because she still wasn't great with darkness. And after that, she just listened to the city and tried to breathe like a normal person. Then the folder appeared. A quiet slide of paper, barely a sound. Atlas's ears went up. Arabella was on her feet before she'd thought about it. 2 tours will do that to you? 4 steps across the room, and she pulled the door open onto an empty hallway. Fluorescent light, clean in both directions. Nobody. She looked down. Manila folder, no name on it. She picked it up, went back inside, sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. 11 printed pages, mostly email chains, internal correspondence on hotel chain letterhead, dated 2019 through early 2023. She read the first page twice, slowly, the way she used to read tactical briefings, absorbing not just what was written, but what the language was trying to hide. By the 3rd page, Atlas had pressed his muzzle into her knee. She was gripping the paper harder than she'd realized. She called Celestine at 6:12. Celestine picked up on the 2nd ring. She always sounded awake on the 2nd ring. Arabella heard a rustle of sheets, then stillness. "Talk to me. Someone left documents under my door." A short pause. "Don't touch anything else in the folder. I'll be there in 20. She was there in 15. Blue jacket over a deep green blouse, charcoal trousers, reading glasses already on, yellow legal pad already in hand. She sat at the desk and read every page without saying anything. It took her about 11 minutes. Arabella sat across from her on the bed. Atlas sat between them, looking like he was presiding. "This is a policy memo," Celestine said finally. "Not a question." "That's how it reads to me too." Celestine set the folder back down on the desk, slowly, the way you'd set down something you didn't want to smudge. "He's coming this morning, whoever they send. I know. They're going to offer you money, an apology, Helena Vane's termination wrapped in a press release, and they're going to ask you to go quietly." Arabella looked at her. "I know that too." Celestine clicked her pen. "Good, let's have breakfast." The Grand Halcyon's restaurant was called the Meridian, and at 8 in the morning it was flooded with light from a wall of east-facing windows, the kind of brightness that made everything look honest, whether it was or not. White tablecloths, real silverware, a fruit arrangement on the host stand that Arabella was reasonably sure had never been touched in its life. They were seated by 7:45 legal pad beside Celestine's coffee, Atlas under the table with his chin on Arabella's foot. Clifton Marsh arrived at 8:03, broad-shouldered, early 50s, groomed the way you get groomed when your appearance is part of your job. Charcoal suit, blue jacket folded over one forearm, leather portfolio, the face of a man who'd handled this kind of thing before and expected to handle it again today. He spotted Arabella first. Half a second later, he clocked Celestine, and something behind his eyes did a quick math problem. You wouldn't have caught it if you weren't looking for it. Arabella was looking for it. He came across the restaurant and introduced himself. Pleasant, direct, trained. He gave his name and his title, Regional Vice President of Guest Experience and Operations, and Arabella thought the word experience was doing more than its share of the work there. "Miss Sutton," he said, sitting down across from them and laying the portfolio on the table. "On behalf of the Grand Halcyon chain, I want to begin by saying, Mr. Marsh." Celestine's voice was pleasant. She didn't raise it. She just put her coffee cup down. "I'm Celestine Adeyemi, State Attorney General. You may have seen the coverage. I'm here today in a dual capacity, as Ms. Sutton's personal counsel and as the state official who witnessed the incident directly. Before we go any further, I subpoenaed the hotel chain's internal communications this morning at 7:45. Your legal team should be getting that paperwork within the hour, if they haven't already." Clifton Marsh held his pleasant expression for approximately 4 seconds longer than was comfortable. "I see. The subpoena covers all internal correspondence regarding service animal policies dating to January 2018, all managerial directives issued by regional and national leadership regarding guest disputes involving ADA accommodations, and all HR records related to Helena Vane's employment history and formal complaints filed during her tenure." He opened his portfolio. His hands were steady. Arabella noted that too. "I want to be transparent with you both," he said. "The chain takes this incident extremely seriously. We are committed to full cooperation with any legal say." "Mr. Marsh." Arabella said his name quietly and he stopped. "Did Helena Vane write that policy herself, or did someone write it for her?" The table went still. Clifton Marsh looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his portfolio. Then he looked back at her. "Miss Sutton, the statement I've been authorized to—" "I'm going to read you something," Arabella said. She reached into the chair beside her and produced the manila folder from under her olive green jacket. She was wearing a white top underneath, her Purple Heart pin on the collar. She opened the folder to the 3rd page and found the paragraph she had memorized at 6 in the morning because she was constitutionally incapable of not memorizing things that mattered. She read aloud, "Regional managers are directed to verify service animal documentation beyond federally mandated requirements when guest comfort may be impacted. In cases of dispute, the priority should be the preservation of the guest experience as defined by the hotel's brand standards." She closed the folder. The restaurant was full of morning brightness. A server across the room was refilling a water glass. Somewhere nearby, someone was laughing at something private and small. Arabella set the folder on the table between herself and Clifton Marsh and let the silence sit there with them. She watched him look at the folder. She watched him understand what it was. She watched the corporate choreography he had arrived with, the careful sequence of apology, compensation offer, and controlled narrative about a single rogue employee. Stop working in real time, the gears stripping, the whole machine going quiet. "That memo," he said, and did not finish the sentence, "is dated March 2019, Celestine said, writing something on her legal pad without looking up. "And the email chain behind it indicates it was reviewed by the chain's national legal team in 2022 and retained without modification. Which means this is not a case of one manager exercising poor individual judgment." She looked up. "This is institutional policy, Mr. Marsh, implemented and maintained at the national level. What happened to Miss Sutton in that lobby was not Helena Vane going off script. It was Helena Vane following it. Clifton Marsh was quiet for a long moment. His portfolio was still open in front of him. The company statement inside it, the one legal, had spent the better part of the night drafting, the one that used the phrases "isolated incident" and "does not reflect our values" a combined 7 times, might as well have been a paper boat in a rainstorm. Atlas shifted under the table and resettled his chin on Arabella's foot. She was watching Clifton Marsh's face go through something that corporate training could not fully contain. It was not guilt exactly. It was closer to the look she had seen on the faces of officers who had just realized the intelligence report was wrong and the situation on the ground was entirely different from what they'd been told. The specific disorientation of a person discovering that the organization they represented had handed them the wrong briefing. "Who gave you that document?" he asked. "Does that change what's in it?" Arabella said. He looked at her directly then, and for the first time since he had sat down, the corporate composure cracked open just slightly. Not into hostility, not into remorse, but into something more like the naked recognition of a man who understood. He had walked into a room carrying a box of Band-Aids and found a structural collapse. "No," he said. "It doesn't." Arabella picked up the folder and held it across the table. "Then take it," she said, "because your legal team is going to need to see it before my attorney's subpoena lands in their inbox. And I want the record to show that I handed it to you directly, in a restaurant, in the morning, across a table, with witnesses." Celestine's pen moved steadily across the legal pad. Clifton Marsh took the folder. He held it for a moment, the way people hold things they know will cost them significantly. Then he set it on top of his portfolio and closed both hands flat on the table and was quiet. Arabella picked up her coffee. Outside the window, the morning sun was coming fully over the buildings now, pouring clean and level through the glass, lighting the white tablecloth between them so that everything was vivid and bright and impossible to look away from. She said it without heat. She said it the way you state a fact that has been true for a long time, and everyone at the table has only just agreed to stop pretending otherwise. "You should have led with that," she said. Clifton Marsh did not respond. There was nothing left to say that wasn't already sitting open on the table between them, in 11 pages of printed internal correspondence that proved exactly what she had always known, that what happened in the lobby was never about Helena Vane. Helena Vane was the voice, the policy was the mouth, and the mouth had been open for 5 years before Arabella Sutton walked through those doors with Atlas at her heel and a Purple Heart on her collar, and the catastrophic misfortune, for the Grand Halcyon chain, of arriving on the same morning as a state attorney general and 800,000 witnesses. Atlas pressed his muzzle against her ankle beneath the table. She reached down once, briefly, and laid her hand on the top of his head. Then she straightened in her chair, set her coffee down, and waited for Clifton Marsh to decide what kind of man he intended to be for the rest of the morning. The curtains were drawn against the morning, not because Arabella Sutton was afraid of the light. She had learned a long time ago that fear and light had very little to do with each other, but because the news vans had been parking along the street since before 6, and their satellite equipment threw white reflections across the ceiling of room 412 that felt too much like searchlights. She had counted 4 vehicles from the 2-inch gap in the curtain she'd allowed herself. Then she'd let the curtain fall and sat back on the edge of the bed. And that was where Celestina Adeyemi had found her, 19 hours after the lobby, still dressed in the same olive green top and dark navy slacks she'd arrived in, her Purple Heart pin still at her collar, her hands folded in her lap, with the careful steadiness of a woman who had learned to carry stillness like a weapon. Celestine was sitting in the armchair near the window now, her blue jacket draped over its back, her deep green blouse catching what little ambient light filtered through the curtains. She had a coffee mug from the room service cart. She wasn't talking. That was the thing about Celestine Adeyemi that most people didn't understand. The woman who commanded courtrooms and prosecuted institutional contempt with the precision of a surgeon, was also, in private, one of the quietest people Arabella had ever known. They had been college roommates for 3 years. They had spoken in the shorthand of women who had watched each other fail and recover, and come out understanding that the recovering was not the interesting part. The failing was. The way a person decided to get back up. That was what told you everything. "You don't have to figure it out today," Celestine said. She wasn't looking at Arabella when she said it. She was looking at Atlas. Atlas was at the foot of the bed. His chin was resting on his paws, his amber eyes tracking Arabella's stillness with the particular quality of attention that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with something that didn't have a good clinical word. He was a Belgian Malinois with a working animal's economy of movement and a level of attunement that Arabella had, in her less guarded moments, described to Dr. Serafina Ito as embarrassing, as in, embarrassing how much he sees, embarrassing how much it helps. Arabella looked at him and thought about Kandahar. This was not unusual. She thought about Kandahar the way other people thought about a scar they had stopped noticing, not constantly, but whenever something pressed against it. The Purple Heart had come from a single decision made in 11 seconds. Her unit had been moving through a market corridor when the lead vehicle hit an IED, and Arabella had run toward the smoke instead of away from it, which was the technical reason for the commendation. The full picture was more complicated, the way full pictures always are. She had pulled Sergeant Marcus Webb from the wreckage. She had pulled Private Destiny Cole from the wreckage. She had gone back a 3rd time, and she had not been able to pull Corporal Jerome Atkins out before the secondary detonation, and she had been thrown back by the blast, and she had lain on her back on the stone ground of that corridor for what felt like a very long time, staring up at open sky, while the world made sounds she could no longer organize into meaning. And she had survived, which was the part that earned the medal, and she had not saved Jerome Atkins, which was the part that lived in her body long after the physical injuries healed. She had not told that story in order. She had never told it in order. She had told it to Dr. Ito across 2 years and 41 sessions, and she had told it in fragments, in the same way you handle broken glass, carefully, piece by piece, aware that the edges are still sharp. What she had not told Dr. Ito, not for a long time, was about the night 11 months after she came home, when she had sat on the kitchen floor of her apartment in the dark. Not because she was in danger, but because she had run out of the particular energy it takes to be upright. She had not turned the lights off deliberately. She had simply stopped reaching for the switch. She had sat on the linoleum with her back against the cabinets, and she had felt, with a totality she couldn't have described if asked, the specific weight of having survived things that other people didn't survive, and the loneliness of that weight, and the way it had no shape that other people could easily hold in their hands. Atlas had pressed himself against her legs and stayed there. He had not moved for 6 hours. She had slept at some point, sitting upright, and when she woke, there was gray morning light coming under the kitchen door, and Atlas was still there, warm and solid and steady, his breathing slow and his body unmoved, as if he had decided that this was the work and he would do it for as long as it took. She had sat there for another 20 minutes before she got up. She had not turned the lights on even then. She had simply moved from one room to another with Atlas at her heel, and she had made coffee, and she had called Dr. Ito's office and left a message that said, "I think I need to move my appointment to this week if that's possible." That was the night she understood, without sentimentality and without drama, that Atlas was not a tool, he was a reason. Her phone rang at 11:14. She looked at the screen. Dr. Serafina Ito. "I'm going to take this," Arabella said. Celestine nodded and stood to refill her coffee from the room service carafe, giving Arabella the particular privacy of a woman whose back is turned. Arabella answered. "I know," she said, before Dr. Ito could speak. I saw you'd called twice. I'm not calling as your therapist right now." Dr. Ito's voice was careful in the way of someone who was also actually calling as her therapist. "I saw the news. I wanted to know how you were. I'm in the room. You haven't been outside." "No." A pause. "How's Atlas?" Arabella looked at the foot of the bed. Atlas had raised his head when the phone rang. He was watching her now with the full concentration of an animal who understood the precise emotional weather of a room. "He's good," Arabella said. "He's better than me. That's not a high bar right now, and that's all right." A beat. "You don't owe anyone a statement. Not yet. Not tomorrow. Not this week. The legal process is moving. Celestine has it." "I know she does." "Then rest." Arabella was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere below, a vehicle door slammed. A second one. The media was still gathering. She thought about the chyron she'd seen on the muted television in the corner last night before Celestine had turned it off. Army Veteran Service dog grabbed in hotel lobby. State Ag witnesses incident. She had watched her own face appear on the screen in the body camera footage from the lobby and felt the dissociation of seeing yourself become a news event, the way your edges go abstract, the way you stop being a person and start being a story. She had not asked to be a story. She had asked for 4 days of quiet. "I'm going to give a statement," Arabella said. Dr. Ito was quiet for 3 seconds, which was its own kind of communication. "Okay, not today. Okay, and not for the cameras. Not in the way they want." She pressed her hand flat against the bedspread, feeling the texture of it. "There's going to be another veteran tomorrow, or next month, someone who walks into a lobby with a service dog and gets exactly what I got, and doesn't have Celestine behind them, doesn't have Rosamund Fairbanks and her 800,000 people watching." Her voice stayed even. It was not an effort. It was practice, years of briefing, years of moving through the world's worst moments with the knowledge that your composure was sometimes the only thing between disorder and something workable. "That person doesn't have a safety net. I do. And if I don't use mine to do something about the net itself, then what exactly did I survive for?" That was not a question. Dr. Ito understood that. "I'll check in tomorrow," Dr. Ito said quietly. "Take care of Atlas. Atlas takes care of me." She heard the warmth in Dr. Ito's exhale. "Then let him." She ended the call. Celestine was back in the armchair, her legal pad on the side table, her coffee in hand. She looked at Arabella with the expression of a woman who had heard enough of a phone call to understand its shape without needing the words. "She thinks I'm not ready," Arabella said. "Are you?" Arabella considered the question with the honesty it deserved. She thought about Jerome Atkins. She thought about 6 hours on a kitchen floor. She thought about Atlas pressing his warm weight against her legs in the dark, steady and present and unbribbable by pain or inconvenience or the hour of the night. She thought about standing in the Grand Halcyon lobby with 2 tours of active combat and a Purple Heart and a medical prescription for rest in her bag, and having a woman in an orange cream blazer reach down and grab her dog's vest in front of a room full of people like she was something to be managed, like her need was an imposition, like her survival was an inconvenience to the decor. She thought about what it costs to be a black woman in America who survives extraordinary things. The cost was not paid once. It was not paid in a lobby or a field commission or 41 therapy sessions. It was a toll that kept its own ledger, and the ledger did not close when you became a news story, and it did not close when a state attorney general produced her badge, and it did not close when 800,000 people watched a 12-minute clip and decided they were outraged on your behalf. The ledger stayed open. You carried it, but you could also decide what you did with what you carried. Atlas stood up from the foot of the bed, walked to where she sat, and leaned his full body weight against her left leg. He stayed there, warm, solid, steady. She put her hand on his back. "Not today," she told Celestine. "Tomorrow." Celestine Adeyemi picked up her legal pad, uncapped her pen, and nodded once. The nod of a woman who had spent a decade preparing for exactly this kind of tomorrow. Outside, the news vans waited. Inside room 412, under the ceiling's quiet overhead light, two old friends sat with a dog between them and said nothing for a long time. And the silence was not empty. It was full of everything they were building toward. The morning light hit the Grand Halcyon's front steps with the kind of clarity that belongs only to days that matter. Full, unfiltered sunlight poured from a sky without a single cloud, catching the brass fixtures of the revolving door, bouncing off the polished stone steps, filling the entire entryway with the kind of overhead natural brilliance that made everything visible and nothing hideable. It was the kind of light that suited testimony. Arabella Sutton stood inside the lobby threshold for exactly 3 seconds before walking through. She wore a deep green blazer over a white scoop neck top and dark charcoal slacks with a clean press line down each leg. Her shoulders were square. Her chin was level. The Purple Heart pin on her left lapel caught the morning sun as she pushed through the door, and for just a moment it threw a small point of light across the gathered crowd like a signal flare, brief, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. Atlas moved at her left heel with the measured precision of a dog who had logged more hours at her side than most people she knew. His service vest sitting perfectly across his back, his amber eyes reading the crowd the way she had taught him never to stop doing. 12 media outlets had assembled on the sidewalk and the hotel's curved front drive. Camera rigs, boom microphones, satellite trucks with their telescoping masts already raised against the blue sky. Dominique Alcott stood closest, her camera crew flanking her in a tight professional cluster, her charcoal blazer pressed and her expression carrying the particular controlled gravity of a journalist who understood she was covering something that would outlast the news cycle. Behind Alcott's crew, reporters from regional affiliates and national networks pressed forward in a loose semicircle, and beyond them, gathered on the sidewalk in something neither planned nor announced, were people, hotel guests, passers-by who had seen the trucks and stopped. A man in work clothes with a paper coffee cup. Two women who appeared to have been on a morning walk and simply stayed. A veteran in a faded unit cap who stood at the outer edge of the crowd with his hands folded in front of him and did not move. Celestine Adeyemi emerged through the door one step behind Arabella Sutton and positioned herself to her left without a word. She wore her blue jacket over a deep green blouse and charcoal trousers, and she stood the way attorneys general stand when they are not there in an official capacity and yet cannot entirely leave that capacity at the door. She carried no legal pad. She carried nothing. She was simply there, which was the only thing Arabella Sutton had asked her to be. The crowd shifted and quieted. Microphones extended. Cameras steadied. A murmur ran through the outer edge of the gathered onlookers and then dissolved into something that was almost silence. Not complete, not theatrical, but the genuine instinctive quiet that a crowd settles into when it understands that what is about to happen deserves to be heard. Arabella Sutton did not consult notes. She had none. She had written nothing down the night before because she did not need to. She had been composing this statement for 20 hours in the way she had once composed after-action reports, in her head, with precision, stripping out everything that was not essential until what remained was only what was true. She looked directly into Dominique Alcott's camera, and she began. 3 days ago, I walked into this hotel carrying a valid reservation, a certified psychiatric service dog, and documentation I was not legally required to provide. I provided it anyway. A member of this hotel's management staff publicly questioned my right to be here, raised her voice at me in a lobby full of guests, and physically grabbed my service dog's vest. I have filed a formal complaint. I want to address something beyond that complaint this morning, and I want to address it clearly." Her voice did not waver. It had the cadence of a woman who had delivered operational briefings in forward operating bases with mortar fire audible in the distance, and the calm in it was not performed. Atlas is a certified psychiatric service animal. He is not a comfort item. He is not a preference. He is medical equipment with a heartbeat. On the night of March 4th of last year, Atlas woke me from a dissociative episode at 2 a.m. by placing his body weight across my chest and staying there until my breathing stabilized. On April 17th, he interrupted a hypervigilance spiral that had lasted 6 hours by inserting himself between me and the door I had been watching and refusing to move until I acknowledged him. On August 9th, he woke me from a nightmare severe enough that I had struck the wall beside my bed. On November 2nd, he lay across my legs on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes because that was where I was, and he did not leave until I stood up. 4 nights. I am naming them by date because they are facts, and because facts are the only thing I know how to offer when the alternative is allowing someone to reduce what he does to a preference that a hotel manager may override. The crowd on the sidewalk had gone completely still. The man in the work clothes had lowered his paper coffee cup. The veteran in the unit cap had lifted his chin. I am not here this morning to pursue a personal settlement. I have been contacted by the hotel chain's regional office regarding compensation, and I have declined it. What I am here to request is a full federal review of this chain's internal service animal policies, including a 2019 internal memorandum that instructed property managers to verify service animal documentation beyond what federal law requires, and to prioritize, in their words, guest comfort when disputes arise. That policy is not a rogue manager's decision. That policy is a corporate document that was reviewed and retained. It is institutional, and it means that what happened to me in that lobby was not an accident. It was a procedure. She let that land. 1 breath. 2. I have been in contact with members of Congress who have agreed to hear testimony on the federal enforcement gap in ADA service animal protections. Those hearings will be announced separately. I am not the first veteran this has happened to. I am simply the one who happened to have a state attorney general standing 6 feet behind me when it did, and a travel blogger with 800,000 subscribers who had the presence of mind to keep filming. The next veteran may not be that fortunate. That is why I am standing here, not for what was done to me, for what will be done to them if nothing changes. She paused again. When she resumed, something in her tone shifted, not softer, but more interior. The way a voice changes when a person steps momentarily out of the formal and speaks directly. I want to thank Tobias Reyes. He is a front desk clerk at this hotel who, at personal professional risk, provided documentation that made the systemic nature of this policy undeniable. He did not have to do that. He did it because he understood that silence in the face of what he witnessed would make him complicit in it. Tobias Reyes understood something that took a corporate regional vice president a full breakfast meeting to begin to comprehend. I am grateful to him. A brief shift in the crowd. Someone near the back said something quietly to the person beside them. The cameras held steady. I want to thank Rosamond Fairbanks, who was filming a hotel check-in video when this occurred, and who chose to keep filming and to publish what she had. She did not know me. She had no obligation to me. She simply recognized something wrong and did not look away from it. That decision provided the documented evidence that made everything else possible. I am grateful to her. She turned her head a fraction toward Celestine Adeyemi beside her, and for just a moment, the formal architecture of the statement gave way to something unguarded and real. And I want to thank Celestine Adeyemi, not as the Attorney General of this state, though she has been formidable in that capacity. I want to thank her as my friend. 23 years ago, she helped me survive a constitutional law final at 2 a.m. Last week, she set down her luggage in a hotel lobby and stood beside me without being asked. There are people in a life who show up at the precise moment when showing up costs something. She is that person. She has always been that person. Celestine Adeyemi did not speak. She did not have to. The line of her jaw and the particular brightness in her eyes said everything a person says when they are moved and refuse to be undone by it in public. Arabella Sutton looked back at the cameras. Her shoulders did not drop. Her voice did not rise. I served 2 tours. I came home carrying things that don't show up on medical scans. I followed my doctor's instructions and I booked a hotel room because she told me I had earned rest. I am not here to be a symbol. I am here because symbols don't change policy. Testimony does. Documentation does. Federal review does. I have provided what I can provide. I am asking the people with the authority to act to use it. She stopped, not because she had run out of words, but because there were no more necessary ones. She reached down and laid one hand briefly on the top of Atlas's head, a gesture so practiced it looked involuntary, and Atlas pressed upward against her palm for exactly a second before she straightened. Then she turned, and without looking back at the cameras, without pausing for the questions that immediately began firing from the press line, she and Atlas walked through the revolving door and back into the Grand Halcyon's lobby, back into the clean overhead light of the atrium, and the door completed its rotation behind them. The crowd did not move. Not immediately. There was a full moment, 4 or 5 seconds, that felt much longer, where the journalists and the guests and the man with the paper coffee cup and the 2 women from the morning walk and the veteran in the unit cap all simply stood in the aftermath of what they had witnessed, as if the air itself needed a moment to resettle around the shape of what had just been said. Then the veteran in the unit cap brought his hands together once, and the sound spread outward through the crowd, the way light spreads, not from a single source, but from everywhere at once, filling the space between the satellite trucks and the polished stone steps and the gleaming brass fixtures until the entire front of the Grand Halcyon was ringing with it, full and unambiguous, climbing into the cloudless morning sky. Inside the lobby, Arabella Sutton heard it. She did not turn around. She walked forward, Atlas at her heel, and the light from the atrium above poured down around them both, and she let it. The civil rights complaint was filed at 9:04 in the morning, 3 days after Arabella Sutton walked out of the Grand Halcyon and delivered her statement into a bank of microphones while the world held its breath. Celestine Adeyemi signed the document herself, which was unusual for an attorney general. That kind of filing typically passed through a deputy, through layers of institutional review, through the careful machinery of bureaucratic distance. Celestine did not use the machinery. She picked up a pen, sat at her desk in the morning light streaming through the tall windows of her office, and signed her name in the clean, unhurried hand of a woman who had been waiting 3 days to do exactly this. The complaint named the hotel chain directly. It named the 2019 internal policy memo by document number, by author, by date of distribution. It named the legal department review conducted in 2022 that had read the memo, flagged it, and retained it anyway. It did not center Helena Vane. That was intentional. Helena Vane was a named party in a separate proceeding, but Celestine had structured the civil rights complaint to aim at something larger and less photogenic than one woman in an orange cream blazer. She had aimed it at the architecture, the walls, the foundation, the thing that had been quietly in place long before Helena Vane ever learned which guests to challenge in a sunlit lobby. Arabella Sutton was still at the Grand Halcyon when the filing went public. She was sitting in the hotel garden under open sky. Atlas stretched across her feet, her phone face down on the wrought iron table beside a cup of coffee she had barely touched. She had agreed to receive news through Celestine, rather than through the continuous scroll of alerts that had been lighting up her phone for 72 hours. When Celestine called, her voice was measured and quiet. the way it got when she was reporting facts she had already processed and set down. Arabella listened without speaking. When Celestine finished, there was a long silence. Atlas lifted his head, looked at Arabella's face, and then rested his chin back across her ankle. She said, simply, "Good." And then she asked if Celestine had eaten, because Celestine had a documented habit of forgetting to eat when she was in the middle of something. And some things do not change between women who have known each other for 20 years. The three veterans came forward on the second and third days following the statement. They did not know each other. They had not coordinated. They arrived individually, through different channels. One through a veterans advocacy organization, one through a direct message to Celestine Adeyemi's office, one through Rosamund Fairbanks herself, who had posted her contact information at the end of a follow-up video and said simply that she was listening. Each of them had a story involving a property in the same hotel chain. Each story involved a service dog, a manager, and a lobby. Two of the three had documentation. One had a photograph. All three had the particular, exhausted expression of people who had been told their experience was a misunderstanding and had spent months believing it. Arabella Sutton reviewed their accounts when Celestine shared them, and she sat with them for a long time. She was not surprised. That was the part that cost her something she didn't have a name for: the complete absence of surprise. She had walked into that lobby knowing, in some cellular way, that the policy existed before she ever saw it in writing. You learn to recognize the architecture even when you can't see the blueprint. 2 tours of active combat will teach you to read a structure by how it moves before you ever find the manual. Clifton Marsh's deposition took place on a Thursday morning in a conference room with overhead fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill and left nowhere to hide. He arrived in his charcoal suit, blue jacket draped over the back of his chair, and he lasted 40 minutes before his corporate composure developed a visible fracture along its center seam. The additional internal communications he produced, not voluntarily, but under the pressure of the subpoena Celestine had filed alongside the complaint, were precise and damning in the specific way that institutional documents become when they are finally read by people who are not trying to protect them. The 2022 legal review had not simply retained the policy. It had strengthened the language in one section. It had added a phrase about managerial discretion that, in context, functioned as permission. Someone in that legal department had read the policy, understood the exposure, and decided the calculus favored the company. Clifton Marsh had not written those emails, but his name appeared in the chain, 3 messages deep, beside a single word: approved. He looked at that email on the screen across from him for a long moment. Then he asked for a brief recess. He did not get one. The hotel chain stock dropped 11% over 4 trading days. It was not catastrophic, not the kind of drop that makes financial journalists use the word collapse, but it was the kind of drop that causes board members to stop sleeping well and start making phone calls to each other late at night. 2 board members resigned within the week. They did so in carefully worded statements that described their departures as personal decisions, as matters of previously planned transition, as everything except what they were. The press did not believe the statements. The press had Rosamund Fairbanks's video, which by that Thursday had reached 14 million views and was still climbing. And they had Fletcher Yoon. Fletcher Yoon had been a guest at the Grand Halcyon the morning of the confrontation. He was a quiet man, a structural engineer from the Pacific Northwest who had been in town for a conference and had checked into the Grand Halcyon because his company had a corporate rate. He had been standing near the elevator bank when Helena Vane reached down and grabbed Atlas's vest, and something in the specific wrongness of that gesture had made him raise his phone without thinking about it. He had 4 photographs. The resolution was excellent. The angle was slightly different from Rosamund Fairbanks's video footage, which meant it captured something the video had not fully shown: the precise position of Helena Vane's grip, her knuckles white against the official service vest insignia, and Arabella Sutton's face in profile, composed and utterly still. The face of a woman who has learned to hold herself together by force of will alone because the alternative is a luxury she cannot afford. Fletcher Yoon testified in the civil proceeding 11 days after the confrontation. He wore a dark blue jacket over a collared shirt, and he answered every question in the even, precise language of a man accustomed to describing structural integrity for legal and technical purposes. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The photographs were entered into the record and the room was very quiet for a moment. The way rooms go quiet when the evidence arrives and there is simply nothing left to argue about. Arabella Sutton was not in the room when Fletcher Yoon testified. She had given her own account in a separate session, and Celestine had been explicit with her. You do not have to attend every proceeding. You do not have to witness every piece of this. You have already done the hard part. The hard part was standing in that lobby and not collapsing. The hard part was pulling out your phone instead of your grief. The hard part was 4 days of rest, interrupted by a system that believed your need for help was negotiable, and then walking outside anyway and speaking into a microphone for the veterans who would come after you without a state attorney general standing 6 feet behind them. That part was done. Helena Vane cleaned out her office on a Wednesday afternoon. The termination had been effective immediately, communicated by Clifton Marsh in a brief phone call in which he had used the phrase, "company's best interest," 4 times in 90 seconds. Her office was not large. General managers at the Grand Halcyon had functional spaces, not impressive ones, full of scheduling software and vendor binders, and the kind of organizational systems that accumulate over years of managing a property that never fully sleeps. She packed her personal items into a cardboard box. Her orange cream blazer, the one she had worn that morning, was folded and placed on top of the box because she could not bring herself to put it on. She stood in the room for a moment after the box was packed, looking at the desk, the filing cabinet, the framed commendations on the wall. There were 3 of them. Manager of the Year, 2018, Regional Excellence Award, 2020, a certificate of completion from a corporate leadership seminar that she had attended in Phoenix and found, at the time, genuinely useful. She had believed she was doing her job. That was the part that would stay with her, not the cameras, not the Attorney General's badge, not the 14 million views, but the specific, awful clarity that she had reached down and grabbed that service vest because a policy told her she could, and a career had taught her to prioritize a narrow definition of guest comfort over the dignity of a woman who had given 312 days to a war and come home with wounds that didn't show on the outside. She had been given a system and she had operated it faithfully, and the system was wrong. And those 2 things, her faithfulness and the wrongness, had become the same thing. She picked up the box. She turned off the light. She left. The federal investigation formally opened the following week. The 2019 memo was the centerpiece, exactly as Celestine had designed it to be. The 3 veterans who had come forward were now formally represented, their accounts entered into the evidentiary record alongside Arabella Sutton's. The hotel chain issued a statement announcing the suspension of the disputed policy pending review. It was written in the careful, passive language of institutions acknowledging fault without using the word fault, and it would not have existed without Rosamund Fairbanks's 40 minutes of footage, or Fletcher Yoon's 4 photographs, or Tobias Reyes sliding a folder of emails under a hotel room door at 6 in the morning, or Arabella Sutton standing in a lobby with her phone raised and her shoulders squared and her Purple Heart pin catching the light, making the decision to document rather than react. Rosamund Fairbanks posted a brief video the day the investigation opened. She was not at the hotel. She was at home, no production setup, just her face and a ring light and 14 million people who had watched her be in the right place at the right moment. She said, "I was filming a hotel tour. I just kept filming." She paused. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone who just keeps going. The system had a name now. The policy had a document number. The reckoning was no longer about one woman in a sunlit lobby. It was about what had been built to make that morning possible, and the long, careful, necessary work of taking it apart. She did not have to come back. That is the first thing Arabella Sutton told herself when she booked the reservation 6 weeks after the confrontation, sitting at her kitchen table with Atlas's head resting on her knee and the cursor blinking on the Grand Halcyon's website. She did not have to come back. No court required it. No therapist prescribed it. Celestine had laughed when she told her, a full, warm laugh that filled the phone line, and said, "Of course you're going back. You've never surrendered a position in your life." Arabella had not laughed at that. She had smiled, which was different and quieter and meant more. She booked 4 nights. She packed unhurriedly, which was new. She folded her deep green blazer and set it on top of the bag, then reconsidered, then left it there. She checked Atlas's vest, his certifications, his records, not because she needed to prove anything to anyone, but because a soldier checks her equipment before a mission. And this was still a kind of mission, not a battle, a reclamation. The drive to the Grand Halcyon took 2 hours and 40 minutes on a clear Tuesday morning. The light that day was the particular kind of early autumn light that makes everything look like it is being seen for the first time. Flat and gold and honest, pouring through the windshield while Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat, ears alert, watching the road with the focused calm that had saved her life on 4 separate occasions and would, she suspected, save it again in ways neither of them could predict. She pulled into the covered entrance. The valet who opened her door was a young man in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers who looked at Atlas and said, without hesitation, "Welcome back, Miss Sutton, and welcome to you too, Atlas." She stopped. She looked at him. He smiled, slightly nervous, and explained, "Mr. Reyes briefed all of us." She nodded once, slowly, and said, "Tell him thank you." Then she walked through the front doors. The lobby was exactly as she remembered it. The glass atrium ceiling, flooding the space with full overhead natural skylight, every surface gleaming, the marble floors catching the morning light in long pale ribbons. She remembered standing in this exact light 6 weeks ago, with her heart disciplined into steadiness, while a woman she had never met decided her service dog was a problem. She stood in that same light now, and it looked different. It was the same lobby. She was the same soldier. The difference was that she had decided, deliberately and with full awareness, that the light in this lobby belonged to her too. The new interim desk manager, a composed woman in an orange top and dark blue jacket named Miriam Selcourt, greeted her with professional warmth, processed her check-in without a single unnecessary question, and handed her a key card, along with a small card that read, "If there is anything you or Atlas need during your stay, our staff is available 24 hours. It is our honor to have you with us." Arabella Sutton read it, turned it over once, and put it in her jacket pocket. She did not cry. She was not the crying kind. But she held on to the card for the rest of the day. Tobias Reyes found her in the corridor near the elevator, entirely by accident, on her way to the room. He was in a different uniform now. Assistant manager, the badge small and new on his chest, his orange polo traded for a collared shirt and dark jacket. He looked young and nervous and deeply sincere. He said, "I'm glad you came back." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "So am I." That was all. It was enough. The room was bright and wide-windowed and quiet. Atlas went immediately to the foot of the bed and settled with a long exhale, his head on his paws, monitoring her from under his brows with the steady patience that was entirely his. She put her bag down. She stood at the window for a while and looked at the garden below, the open sky garden she had seen in the hotel photographs and had not been sure she would ever actually sit in. She went down that afternoon. She brought a novel. She had not read fiction in 2 years. Not since the hypervigilance made sustained attention feel like a thing her brain no longer offered. She sat in the garden in full open daylight, the overhead sun warm on her olive-green short-sleeved top and dark navy slacks, Atlas across her feet like ballast, and she read 40 pages without checking her phone once. This was in the private accounting she kept of her own recovery. Extraordinary. She swam on the second morning. The hotel pool was enclosed in glass and lit from above by a full skylight ceiling. The water the particular pale blue of clean, uncomplicated things. She swam laps until her arms were tired and her mind was quiet, which was the goal. Atlas waited at the pool's edge, patient and watchful, and when she climbed out and dried her face, he stood and pressed his head briefly against her hip, which was his way of saying several things at once, none of which required translation. She slept without nightmares on 3 of the 4 nights. The third night she woke at 2 in the morning from something formless and dark, and Atlas was already awake, already moving, already pressing his weight against her side before she had fully surfaced from sleep. She put her hand on him. She felt his breathing, slow and steady, in and out, a living metronome that her own nervous system recognized and followed back to stillness. She lay there in the quiet hotel room for a while, hand on Atlas's flank, and she thought about Dr. Serafina Ito saying, "Rest is not a reward, it's a requirement." She had not believed it when Serafina said it. She was beginning to. Celestine arrived on day 3 in a blue jacket over a deep green blouse and charcoal trousers, carrying a tote bag and looking like herself, which was to say, formidable and deeply fond in equal measure, in the way of people who have known you before you were anyone else recognized. They ordered room service. They watched something entirely inconsequential on the television, a baking competition of all things that Arabella Sutton would have been embarrassed to admit enjoying if she had not long since stopped ordering her leisure time by what could be defended in a briefing. They laughed at something small and private that had no connection to the case or the policy or the federal investigation or the 4 veterans who had come forward or the 14 million views or any of it. They just laughed, the 2 of them, in a hotel room full of overhead light and room service containers, with Atlas asleep between them on the carpet. And it was, Arabella Sutton thought, one of the better hours of the last several years. Celestine left the next morning. She had depositions. She always had depositions. They embraced in the corridor, and Celestine held on for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and said, quietly, near her ear, "You did something important." Arabella did not answer. She did not need to. On her last morning she woke early, before the alarm, while the room was still gray and the light was just beginning to form itself into something. Atlas lifted his head and watched her. She lay still for a while, cataloging the silence, the absence of nightmares, the absence of dread, the plain, astonishing fact of having slept. She got up. She dressed in her deep green blazer over a white top and dark slacks, the Purple Heart pin on her lapel, and she took Atlas downstairs in the early quiet of the hotel while most of the guests were still sleeping. She asked the night clerk for a piece of paper and a pen. She wrote 7 words and folded the note and wrote Tobias Reyes's name on the front. She left it at the front desk. It said, "Courage is contagious. Thank you for catching it." Then she and Atlas walked out of the Grand Halcyon into the full morning sunlight. The light was already bright and wide open, the way morning light is when the day has not yet decided to be anything specific. She stood on the front steps for a moment, not because she needed to gather herself, but because the light was worth standing in. Atlas sat at her left heel, ears up, watching the street with his usual alert contentment, waiting to see what she would do next. She had 4 days before she had to be anywhere. She had nowhere in particular to be right now. She started walking, not toward anything, not away from anything, just forward, in the sunlight, with Atlas at her side, unhurried, unguarded. A soldier who had finally fully stood down. She had earned this, every single step of it. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.